Hello people of YouTube, my name is Brad, this is my channel, and I'm an Orange, and welcome to another ICONX review video where we are going to talk about the Western Star 4900 logging truck and trailer you see here. Interesting note, these two do not actually attach. The way this arm is set up, there is no room to attach it. If you look in the photos on the packaging online, they're put near each other, but they're not actually attached. I was a little surprised by that tidbit myself, and I know when I showed pictures, a lot of other people were a bit surprised too. This was such a long build, taking me a total of 10 hours to complete the entire build. This part right here, the truck, took the majority of that time. It's 6.5 or 6.5 hours to put this together. There's so much detail crammed into this model. It's absolutely amazing. I love it. It took so much time because it's challenging, but not frustratingly challenging, but because it's challenging, there's a lot of parts to connect and shape and carefully put together. This model did not frustrate me. It did not aggravate me. I did not find myself going, why am I doing this? I've had models that were complicated and difficult, and I questioned, why did I have to do this way? Why this seems to be the hard way? Why is this so difficult? This model kept my attention. This model kept me wanting to keep moving forward, wanting to finish it, wanting to get to the next step, wanting to see the next part completed. Every assembly that came together was satisfying, was exciting, was fun to look back and go, wow, that was really cool how that came together. It's really worth the amount of effort I'm putting into it. There's so much detail. I posted a picture of these side boxes, steps right here. There's like 7 or 8 pieces just in one assembly that goes on, and even after that there's other parts that kind of go around and on top and underneath. I'm not exactly sure because I no longer know any truckers, but I think under here are the gas tanks, and possibly the back tank is maybe a diesel exhaust tank, because I know that's a thing. Diesel exhaust fluid is actually a thing, and there are tanks for that, so I'm not really sure. Don't have all the details, but there's just so much complexity. I am a little disappointed in how in the end the smokestacks look, but that's just going to be a difficult thing to not bend accidentally. I might be able to take some tweezers to that, and well, that looks a little bit better. Then again, I don't know. That's going to take some playing with. This is really wobbly. I hate that it's so wobbly. I ended up taking this side back off and getting it tighter. Should have done it to the other side too. There's so many things to talk about in this model. So many assemblies that come together, and so much detail. So many little bitty flaps that have to be folded over. It reaches the edge of what I think is possible. There were a lot of parts where there's just tiny little flaps that I really had to get a good grip on with whatever tool that I was using, whether it's the flat nose pliers or tweezers, and trying to bend these thin little pieces over so that they don't warp, so that it's shaped right. That was borderline frustrating. I say borderline because it's difficult, but it adds so much detail that I had no problem doing my best to try and do it and make it happen. The trailer took 3.5 hours to put together. It is a lot simpler. The wheels come together a little bit differently, but mostly the same. That's something to talk about right there. I kind of want to talk about the wheels a little bit, not just in the trailer, but in the truck as well. I remember making a comment. I've built the Freightliner models. I built the little Freightliner long nose truck. I've built the Freightliner cab over engine COE truck. And I remember making the comments, in the long nose truck, the rear wheels were just, the band that goes around was one solid piece with like a dotted line or a gap to make it look like 2 wheels. Because, you know, the back of the wheels on the tractors are 2 wheels side by side. It allows it to carry more weight, and when a tire blows, you're not just dead out of luck. You have backup. I think there's probably a little more to it than that, but simply put. And I was a little bit disappointed they didn't separate the wheels out. Now, when I built the cab over engine truck, the Freightliner COE, it did have the back wheel separated out. And I made the comment that while there's a little bit more work to do it that way, I would rather do it that way, and I think it looks better and it's worth the extra effort. The rear tires actually has all 2, 4, 6, 8 tires separated out, so you have to build each one. Makes it take a little longer. I appreciate that. I appreciate the added detail. I almost feel like somebody heard me and said, you know what, challenge accepted, because these back wheels are complicated and there is a lot to it, and you kind of have to almost do some, well, you do have to do some math to make sure you've cut out enough parts. The way the instructions are laid out, the assembly flow chart, you have to think about it a little bit. And there's been situations in other models like the Dragon model where, I think it was a Dragon model, recently a question came up where how many times are you supposed to do this part, because it says 2 but then there's more pieces. Well, you're supposed to do this part twice and then the assembly here adds to this over there and you do that part 2 times, so really this assembly needs to be done 4 times. Similar situation, exact situation with some of these wheels where you do, let me find the instructions real quick. I've got the instructions here so I can kind of at least look like I know what I'm talking about. But you start off on page 8. You're still building the truck and you're starting to put the pieces of the wheels together. And there, the wheels start at the top up here and you're still putting wheels together all the way down here. And there's a lot going on. You start off with one section, you've got C76, which is the little box thing that connects the wheels to the body, and B77, and you put those together and you do that twice. And then you come down and the next part is 78, 79, 80, and 81. All those pieces come together twice. And then you come down and you've got 82, 83, and 82 and 83 come together twice. And then past that, it says 84, B84, and then it shows the previously done part, which is 82 and 83. It shows 2 of those, the 2 that you made. Those come together with part 84, and you do that twice. So, because you're doing the step twice, in reality you have to do the previous step 4 times. So, where you add 82 to 83 twice, it takes those 2 to make one of the next step, but the next step you've got to do twice. So, the previous step you really need to do 4 times so that you can do the next step twice. Hope that makes sense. And that is a situation that's kind of repeated. The next part you do twice. You add the full assembly of the back wheels to the previous front assembly, and then yeah, it'll make sense once you see it. But there are situations where you actually have to do parts more than what they say, because you kind of have to do math. This assembly makes these 2 wheels here, or 2 sets here and on the other side. But then these 2 sets, where you've got 4 of them, 2, 2, 2, 2 in the back, are a separate assembly. They're actually slightly different. It's very slightly different. I think the size is slightly different, because this is kind of like on a dump truck, that extra wheel to carry extra weight, I think. You kind of repeat a similar process where you're making like the inside part of the wheel, which has the square box that attaches everything, and then you make the outside part of the wheel that you show, which is like the hub and whatnot, and then you make the tread part. And again, the tread part is part 60, which is a long strip that has tread on it, rounded and connected to part 87, which is a flat round piece. And then it says to do that twice. And then you take part 88 in a circle and 2 of those previous parts and put those together to make the dually set, the one set of wheels. But you're supposed to do that 4 times. So in reality, the previous step that you did twice, you actually need to do 2 times 4, 8 times. That can be a little confusing. You have to think about it a little bit. But in that situation, they could have just said do this 8 times and been straightforward about it. But then that would have potentially confused this group of people. But they decided to do 2 times, and then 2 of those are used over here where you have to do 4 times, so you got to do the math. Either way they go, they're going to lose a few people and make them have to think about it, but that's the gist of it. Because you're using 2 of this assembly to make this assembly over here, but you got to do this 4 times, you really have to do 8 more fingers of this assembly over there. Another interesting thing that I noticed with this build, and it only happened with the black colored areas. You notice this thing is completely painted. Even I think the silver parts have a silver paint on them. I'm not sure about that, but lots of color. That's a dark color, but lots of color. With the black parts, I noticed numerous times where I would go to connect the parts together to connect a tab and a slot, and the slot was covered up. The slot was covered up by that black painting or coating, whatever it is. Not a big deal, because it really didn't take much to take the point of something and poke it out. Wasn't a fight. I've had block tabs before where I had to work at widening it, but took the point of my tweezers, poked it in the hole, piece popped out, and I kept going. Not a big deal. I'm guessing that's just an unfortunate side effect of the painting, but again, it's really easy to overcome. Just vaguely worth mentioning, certainly not worth, in my opinion, complaining about. I do want to add, and this is pretty much true with any model, whenever it says to fold the tabs versus twisting the tabs, pay attention, or at least look ahead to find out why. There are a number of situations with so much detail in this where you need to fold the tab rather than twisting it so the next part can attach on. The biggest example of that is with this back trailer piece. The way these wheels attach is a little different than the front. There is a side piece that attaches to the framework that what you do is when you're assembling it, there's lots of little tiny flaps to fold over, but you start by taking that little squarish connector piece that goes between the wheel and the whatever it's attaching to. You connect that to this flat piece first, and you have to fold those tabs over. That is a challenge. That is the most challenging part of this rear section, is trying to get those square boxy connector axle thingies connected to that flat piece. There's two per each one, two wheels attached to each side, and there's two side pieces. I'm gonna lose my logs here. And what I did is there's three tabs, one up top and then two parallel at the bottom. I folded the parallel ones inwards carefully without destroying the part that's attaching to, because it's a very thin part. The top tab I flipped up. There's really not room to flare them all outwards, but folding the two sides in and the top part up seemed to work. Get both of those on, then the wheels attached to it, and then the whole thing attaches to this frame that you've been building. And that's a little bit different. That's the most challenging part, but it's very important that you fold those tabs, because this part's not going to fit properly. And even that way, the wheels are a little, I wish they were a little more secure. They kind of want to warp outwards. This is sitting on a magnet, so it's kind of helping holding them straight. But one of these back wheels is a little wobbly. On top of that, because those tabs are folded and not twisted, folded tabs, in my opinion, are not as secure and will wobble a lot easier than twisted tabs if you twist them correctly. And again, there's no way to put this together properly without folding them, so you just don't really have much of a choice. And what I ended up doing, a couple of those back wheels were just too wobbly after I got things together. So I grabbed some 5-second fix that I've occasionally played with, put a few drops down in that area, hit it with the light on the end, and it stiffened things up. And that's one of the good uses, one good use for that 5-second fix is to throw it inside of a loose connection, harden it to hold things together. Eventually I'm going to do a video about the 5-second fix. I'm working on a few different ways to use it before I do that. But yeah, there's some other areas I can't think of right now, but that's one of the big areas where when it says fold the tabs over, do it. Another area though, however, it doesn't say fold them, it says twist them, is where these two things connect to the flat piece that goes on top. Wished, at least for the back, I wished I would have folded them in, but I thought there was enough clearance and I didn't think too much of it. But the front is not a big deal, it seems to do okay. And maybe it's how I twisted it with the back. There's actually, take these off, these just lay on there, they don't actually attach. If you look, there's cross beams all down there. There's a cross beam under this one, and the tabs partially intersect. So this piece doesn't want to sit all the way flat, and it bugs me. I don't want to take it back apart and mess with it at this point. But the question I tend to ask myself at the end of a build is there anything I would do differently now that I know all that's involved? And that's the one thing that I can think of, is when attaching these two pieces, folding those flaps over, or at least twisting them and then bending them sideways out of the way so that we'd have the clearance and this would sit a little flatter, because I'm not completely satisfied with how it turned out. I've kind of manhandled it and got it looking okay. This front piece does not want to sit straight. But yeah, that's the one big thing that I would do differently. Another interesting thing that happened that I almost forgot about if it wasn't for looking back at my own notes and notations of making this model. When you first start this build, you're working on these, what I believe are the air cleaner filter things on the side of the truck, these big round things. And they're a little bit complex. You notice there's several different pieces in there. They actually have some numbers hidden, kind of hidden in there. And the numbers help you to line the parts up properly. So part 1, which is the main drum piece, I think it's on one side or both. One side, can't remember which side, has a number 1 listed on it. And then the next part 2, which is kind of the squarish stem that attaches that to the body, has a number 2 on it. And the instructions show where that 1 and 2 are supposed to be and the orientation of which when those two things connect together. And then when you build the other side, which is part 6 and 7, there is a 6 and a 7, and you can tell which way is right side up and which way is upside down, and it shows the way that they look when the parts come together. And that is an interesting, simple, and direct way to show how parts come together so you don't get them backwards. There is almost no way to mess that up other than just simply misunderstanding it completely. I think that's an interesting thing that they've done there. It's the only situation that I've ever seen it used, but it helps to build those front 2 parts. There's also a little bit of confusion here and there about where the engraved side is indicated and where it actually is at. Some parts are a little hazy, and it helps to just reference the finished model, the 360 view, to know just how parts came together. I do make comments in the build videos. There's 3 parts of the build video already out there. The first part builds pretty much the cab area of the truck. Part 2 builds the rest of the truck, the frame, the wheels, the crane, and adds a bit around the cab area. Part 3 is the trailer part, trailer and log assembly. And in there are a few situations, and I don't really want to touch on every single one of them in the review video, but there are a few situations where, like the engraved bubble points over here, and it's kind of pointing at the center of the part. When in reality, for instance, this one part kind of squares around in a box, and it's the steps on the side. There is an engraved area right there on the edge of where the point of that is. There's another engraved area over here on the flip side. And it's talking about this one engraved area is faced up, when in reality, if you just hold the part as pictured, where the tabs are pointing the way that they're pointing in the picture, you're going to shape the thing the right way, and don't worry about what it's saying the engraved side is. And for the most part, if you do that, or if you look at the pictures, you can figure it out. I think there is one area where it points the engraved side, and I'm not exactly, either I'm misinterpreting it or it's backwards. But either way, if you look at the picture and understand how it's supposed to come together in the end, you'll get it right. And I'm pretty sure I got everything oriented correctly in my build. There is an odd point on page 4 in the instructions that I kind of want to note. I think it's funny, maybe it's just me, but it's part of building the cab, and you've shaped the seats and added them to the floorboard. And then you go on to shaping or working with the cab and assembling the cab. And there's a step where it's the long nose is attaching to the doors, and then the next step it shows adding the dash and steering wheel in, and the next step is where the seats come in from underneath. But it's so vaguely drawn, you like just barely see the bottom of the seats and barely see the top of the seats through the window, and there's a couple of blue circles. I actually breezed that over thinking, well, that's what it's one of those, this is what it's supposed to look like, and then you move on, because sometimes the instructions will say bring these 2 parts together, these 2 parts together, and then it'll show you the finished piece. And that's what I thought that was, showing me the finished piece, and I missed that it was adding the seat. And I went on to the next part that shows folding the back, the under flaps inwards, and then it shows the finished piece. And I was like, the next part is doing the grill part, and I'm like, shouldn't the seats be coming in this area? And I had to go back and look and actually see the kind of barely, to me it seems like it's barely indicated. I don't think they're trying to be deceptive in this. It's just the way it's drawn in the small area. It's just easy to overlook. Maybe that was just me, but I thought I would warn other people when you're on page 4 putting the cab pieces together. Don't miss the seats. Don't miss the seats. It's a little easier if you get those in before you fold the bottom flaps under, but it's not impossible if you have to go back. There are so many different wheels on this model, and there's so many different times where you're using some sort of drum-shaped tool to round things over and over again. You've obviously got the tire pieces that are rounded to make the wheel. You've got in these rear wheels, you've got inner pieces that have to be rounded over. The hubs attach inside and then they attach to the wheel. And then with the dually sections, there's also a round piece in between each section that has to be rounded. And this wheel is a slightly different size than these wheels, and there's so many different wheels, as many different tools as I have with the 3D printed rounding and cone shaping sticks, with the dowel rods that I have, with the step mandrels that I have, with the drill bits that I have. I actually struggled a couple of times to find exactly the right size whatever to shape a part. There were a couple of times with the back wheels where this tool was slightly too big and I couldn't connect the tabs, but this tool was slightly too small and left a little bit of play area, and I had to improvise. So despite the fairly large amount of tools that I have, I still struggled a little bit with finding the right size for all the rounded pieces in this model, and I just thought that was kind of amusing how that worked out there. And even all the way down to the logs. When I went to shape the logs, if you're watching part 3 of the video, I ended up using the handle of one of my step mandrels to finish this shape, because it's closest to the right size as opposed to any of the other tools that I have were just too big or too small. The handle was almost perfect. The handle's not completely flat, but it moving around, it did the job, and I was able to get the logs together. Another interesting little trick and situation that I dealt with that I don't know that I've talked a whole lot about. This really is bothering me how this is. The top portion of the exhaust, the smokestacks, whatever you want to call them, is squared. And it's a very thin piece, and I don't really have any tools that are thin enough to hold that so that I can fold all the sides. The thing is, it's got all 4 sides on one piece, so it has to be folded into kind of a box shape. And there's a trick that I've learned. There's been other situations where you had a really thin long piece that needed to be folded into a box shape, and I didn't have any tools to get in there to do it right. So the trick that I've learned is, you've got this flat piece and there's 1, 2, 3 folds. There's a center fold and then there's 2 side folds for the side pieces, and then they all fold around into a box. Take that center piece, use whatever tool, bend it slightly. You don't have to bend it all the way, just bend it slightly, break it, kind of break the tension on it. Then take your tool and the outer pieces, bend those at 90 degrees. So you have the center part slightly bent, the outer pieces are completely bent, and then once you get those 2 outer pieces, pull your tool out, take it, and kind of pinch it together on the outer corners. And if done properly, this works 98% of the time. That center piece will bend in. You've got the 2 outer pieces, the center piece will bend in, and it comes together in the shape that it needs to. Once you get it close, you may need to finagle and go up and down the part and make small adjustments, but it's a trick that's worked really well in the past, and it worked really well for these 2 stacks. If only I would have had the forethought to do something inside of that to make it more secure so it wasn't so messed up and floppy. And I often find myself trying to make parts look neater, trying to make the assembly look neater, and that means folding over tabs in a lot of visible areas whenever possible, even if the instructions say differently. I tried to do a similar thing with these cross member pieces. These cross member pieces are 2 to 3 pieces that actually come together to make the piece that you see in between. And there's tabs that connect, like a top and a bottom piece, and they're like half a shape here and half a shape here. They come together with tabs to make that box shape sort of center piece. And initially I started with a couple of the larger pieces and carefully folded the tabs over to make it clean and neat looking, But then, as you notice, some of these pieces are larger than others. Smaller pieces, like this one here, worried me. And I was afraid that if I tried to bend those tabs over, and it started to do this, I bend the tab over because it's two half-bent pieces with a tab sticking out. You try to bend this tab, and what happens, you end up bending the whole part one way or another and knocking it out of shape. And it's hard to come back from that situation once that center piece starts to bend too far. The piece is immediately starting to weaken. I wasn't going to play that game, so I did as the instructions said, and the connecting pieces from that point on I just twisted. It's not as clean looking, but otherwise I'm looking at possibly breaking this part. That's one thing. You do the model the way you want to do, and if you're up for that challenge, maybe you want to try and maybe you can pull it off. But I started to with the smaller parts and just kind of gave up on that effort. For the most part, that's going to be covered up when it's on display, and I wanted to go with the safer route rather than taking too much of a risk. Those are kind of covering some of the main points on this build. There's a lot more detail, a lot more to talk about during the build. If you want to know more, I suggest watching the build videos. If you're running into a problem in one area, I did split the videos into 3. Again, the part 1 is mostly concentrated on this nose and cab and grill area. Part 2 is the rest of the framework and the arm of this build, and part 4 is just the trailer and the logs. There's a lot more detail, a lot more commentary in those videos, and I don't want to spend too much time in this going over every little bit. That covers some of the main things that you're going to encounter that I wanted to comment on. It is a wonderful build. I know I frequently see, like, the Metal Earth subreddit and sometimes in other social media, people going, hey, I really like the challenge. What is a more challenging model? I've done this and this and this. I want to move to something more challenging. And oftentimes people start recommending things other than Metal Earth and ICONX, because Metal Earth and ICONX models do tend to be on the simpler end of things. And I mean no insult in that. Metal Earth does have a wide range of difficulty, but usually in the higher levels people tend to go through things like the MU Transformers or some of the Peace Cool or Picture Kingdom models. Some of those things get to be more challenging. Some of that is just because of the complexity, and some of that is because some of those are, the instructions are more difficult to interpret. But this model is, this ICONX model with the truck and trailer was surprisingly challenging, very satisfying in its challenge, and one that I would recommend if somebody come along and said that I've built Iron Man and I've built, you know, all these ICONX models and these more complicated Metal Earth models, I want to look for something more challenging. Where do I go? Oh, if they haven't done this, I would certainly recommend it. It again took a total of 10 hours to put this entire thing together, which is approaching some of the smaller MU models. I can't remember how long Iron Man took. I want to say Iron Man took something like 6 to 8 hours to put him together. And that was a very challenging build. This is at very least up there with the Iron Man difficulty. I would say more so. It's a long build. It's challenging. It introduces a lot of different concepts and a lot of different things. And to me, it was so much fun to build. Part of me is ready to get this behind me and move on to something else, because it's taken me so long to build it, to do the videos, to do the review and everything that's involved. A small part of that is because life has been challenging lately, but a large part of that's because this is such a long, complicated, but satisfying build. I'm ready to put it behind me, but I've enjoyed every bit of the experience. This is an amazing model. Well done, Metal Earth Fascinations, for this just amazing model. This just impressively amazing model. Now, I have not built the Metal Earth version of this, but I have looked online at the instructions, and it appears to be the same build. The sheets are not long Metal Earth, or excuse me, not long ICONX size sheets. They're smaller Metal Earth sheets, but I think it's the same part. I think it's the same size, and from what I've seen on the instructions, the same build. So you're looking at still getting a very satisfying challenge without having to worry with the trailer if you do the Metal Earth version, I think. Haven't built it yet, but from what I've seen, they're on the same level. you're going to end up finishing about 3.5 hours earlier, because that's how long it took to do the trailer. You don't have to do that, but yeah, that's pretty cool. Thought I'd point that out. I could rattle on and on and on about more and more detail with this model. It was so much fun to build and so amazing. The wheels were so complex, and like I mentioned before, that was kind of, it popped in my head. I wonder if they heard my comment on the Freightliner COE truck and how I'd rather do the extra effort, and they went, challenge accepted, because those wheels do have a lot of parts. There's 2 parts for the inner part of the wheel. There's 2 to, I want to say, 4 parts for the outer part, depending on which wheel it is, because you've got like the outer disc, you've got the inner piece, and another inner piece, and then another cap on top of that, and then you've got the center piece, which is actually 2 tires, which each tire has 2 pieces each, and then another piece that joins those 2 together, and then all of that sandwiches together to make one set of wheels on the back or on the trailer. Very complicated. It took a lot of time in the build. I thought it was funny in a sadistical sort of way. I don't know. I'm okay with that. It was the extra work, but they look amazing, and there's so much detail, and just wow. I'll leave it at that. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you to Fascinations for sending me this model to review. I almost forgot to point that out. This was sent to me a while back as a model to build and review for them. This is an honest review. They have not told me what to say or how to say it. They've left it up to me, and I've really enjoyed this build. If you want to know more, there's the build videos I've got for it, as well as CodeWookie. If you're familiar with CodeWookie, he has a MetalEarthBuilder.com website where he does a blog version of these builds, and certainly go read his review of this as well. It'll probably shed some more insight. I have learned that we come at things slightly different ways, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have a wonderful Metal Earth family. Thank you for watching. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. And as always, keep on keeping on. So I think as I was setting up for this video, one of my lights fell over, and I think it impacted this and has warped it, because it wasn't like this. I don't think it was like this earlier. That's going to take... That's a little bit better. So yeah, sometimes I am my own worst enemy, and with this not being on the magnetic piece, you can kind of see how these wheels want to flare out a little bit, and that bothers me.